to be presenting and talking about the correlation between red meat and type 2 diabetes. So red meat in the modern American diet, the average American consumes around 3.5 ounces of red meat per day. Several studies suggest a potential link between high red meat intake and increased risk of type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes affects over 37 million Americans, with lifestyle and diet as major contributing factors. Replacing red meat with plant-based protein sources may reduce risk of diabetes and provide environmental benefits. The correlation between type 2 diabetes and red meat. Some nutrition experts advocate for public awareness campaigns to reduce red meat consumption, especially processed red meat like bacon and sausages. These compounds have been shown to negatively impact insulin sensitivity and increase inflammation, two major factors in development of type 2 diabetes. Meanwhile, the meat industry defends red meat's role in a balanced diet and calls for more research before making any policy changes. Okay, investigation plan. So today we're going to be investigating why red meat consumption in relation, why even investigate this correlation in the first place, why focus on red meat instead of other foods, and how does red meat compare to processed meat or plant-based diets. How will findings affect public health, policy, or behavior, and could dietary guidelines be adjusted based on results, and also would reduce red meat consumption lower healthcare costs or diabetes rates. Why are researchers and doctors concerned about red meat, and including what have previous studies found about red meat in chronic diseases, as well as are certain groups, age, BMI, more at risk. Lastly, the last topic question is going to be suggestions for the issue. Should we promote plant-based alternatives through education or subsidies, and nutrition education campaigns, the roles the government can play, as well as should we set dietary guidelines that limit red meat consumption and encourage more fiber-rich foods. Okay, why investigate red meat consumption in relation to type 2 diabetes? Type 2 diabetes shows in these graphs that it is prevalent. As we can see on the first graph to the left, type 2 diabetes prevalence increases with more meat consumption. We have a non-vegetarian who has a 7.6% prevalence, whereas a vegan has a 2.9%. And starting at the non-vegetarian, we can see that as more meat is taken away, we have a semi-vegetarian who has a reduced prevalence, whereas a pescatarian has an even more reduced prevalence, and the graph continues increasing. So we can see that there is some correlation between type 2 diabetes and meat consumption, as well as we have the two graphs on the right-hand side that do show as time has increased, we have as well increased our type 2 diabetes as well as our meat consumption throughout the years. Why focus on red meat instead of other foods? So we can see here that swapping out unprocessed red meat with poultry, seafood, and a variety of different options that are other than meat did decrease the hazard ratio mean. So replacing red meat also had a significant reduction of the hazard ratio. So therefore, we can see that replacing red meat with poultry, nuts, etc. does reduce our risk for diabetes by about 17 to 18%, which is a statistically meaningful reduction. How will findings affect public health policy or behavior? And could these guidelines be adjusted based on results? And would reduced meat consumption lower healthcare costs or diabetes rates? So if you see here, this is just a statistic for Mayo that I was able to find with, showing our risk of diabetes. The more processed red meat, as processed red meat intake increases, the risk of diabetes increases as well. And dietary guidelines could be very beneficial. And if we have guidelines regarding our processed meat, this could reduce this risk, as well as we would have lower healthcare costs, as insulin and other type 2 diabetes patients need significant healthcare equipment, so this would help reduce healthcare costs. So why are researchers and doctors concerned about red meat? What have previous studies found about red meat and chronic diseases, and are certain groups more at risk? So doctors and researchers are definitely concerned about red meat because not only does it affect type 2 diabetes, but it affects, it increases the rate of cancer. So far, our studies have shown that there is strong evidence. And, when we are consuming this red meat, our body can't use our insulin receptors properly. This can develop at any age, and it can be prevented. And many people are diagnosed. Risk factors for type 2 diabetes include being overweight, having a family history, being physically inactive, and being 45 or older. So our insulin resistance, is reduced with age as well. But, all these other factors can, be reasons for developing type 2 diabetes. So suggestions for the issue: should we promote plant-based diet, alternatives through education, and having nutrition education campaigns, and setting dietary guidelines that reduce red meat consumption? I think yes, eating less red and processed meat can help lower the risk of type 2 diabetes. Diets high in plant-based proteins like beans, lentils, nuts, and whole grains improve blood sugar control and reduce inflammation. We did see this by our previous graph or a previous chart showing that the hazard ratio was decreased when we did swap out our red meat with other items. So yeah, even small changes like going meatless for once or twice a week can make a difference. Plant-based diets are rich in fiber, nutrients that support insulin sensitivity, while red meat is linked to higher rates of diabetes and other chronic diseases. In short, yes, promoting plant-based foods through education and subsidize can reduce red meat intake and lower diabetes risk. Individuals can eat more meatless meals. Schools can offer plant-based options and teach nutrition, and governments can update dietary guidelines to reduce our red meat intake and promote fiber-rich foods. Thank you.